we're part of the Red Squirrel Network, so yeah, we are funded by the National Heritage Fund, so thank you very much for that. Hi, I'm Natasha Hemsley, I'm Communities Officer. I have been at the Northumberland Wildlife Trust for 5 years now, but working very much in the urban community zone, so trying to empower local people to take action for nature, whatever that may be for them in urban areas. But now we're working on raising awareness as part of our assignment, so my job is very much engagement.
My name is Abbie McQueen. I'm the Project Officer for RSRN. I was previously Project Officer for Red Squirrels Northern England, which is another squirrel project under Northumberland Wildlife Trust. And then on the right of the screen there is Emily, our Data and Information Officer. She basically collates loads of records from various organisations and volunteer groups. And she also works on analysing data, things like that. So we're going to cover a few different things. I'll start off with some red squirrel ecology, what are red squirrels like. I'll then move on to why they're in decline, what's the problem, threats that they face. And then I'll pass you over to Natasha, who's going to speak a little bit about the Red Squirrel Recovery Network, and finally how you can help. So I thought we'd start with a quote from David Attenborough that says, "No one will detect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced." So many people haven't seen a red squirrel, especially in more urban areas, and also younger generations who haven't grown up with them in their gardens. So we're really aiming to increase local knowledge and give people the option to get involved. On the next slide is just a quick video of a red squirrel, so I'll let that play. So I just think this is a really lovely video that kind of shows how intelligent they are. You can see one of the key characteristics, which are their ear tufts as well. So red squirrels are native species. They've lived here since the last ice age, which was around 10,000 years ago. And they are now considered a priority species, which means it's illegal to disturb, injure, or kill a red squirrel. And then I'm just going to go on to a little bit about what they're like. So this graph here shows when things happen throughout the year for reds, and a little bit about their breeding season. So the mating chases begin in January, and they'll have their first litter of around 3 to 4 kittens in March. If the female's had enough food over the summer months, she might have a second litter in July, August, so they can breed multiple times a year, but this really depends on kind of food availability and condition of the squirrel, things like that. So female squirrels must reach a minimum weight of around 280 to 300 grams before they're able to breed. And then once they're pregnant, gestation lasts around 5 to 6 weeks. Like other mammals, when the kids are born, they're blind, deaf, and completely dependent on their mother. It's not until around the 7th week of their life that they'll start to venture out of the nest a bit, explore their environment. And then on the 10th week, they might be a bit more weaned and independent. They might be fully weaned and independent, but they'll still stay quite close to the nest. And then in the autumn is usually when juveniles disperse completely. So this graph shows when squirrels are active at different times of year. So they don't hibernate, they are active all year round. They're just quite a lot less active in winter. So in winter time, you'll generally see them more so late morning, not so much in very early morning or evenings. But then in spring, autumn and summer, they're a lot more active earlier on and later on. The best time to see a red squirrel is probably very early on a summer morning. That's generally when they're most active. They do spend a lot of their time in the canopy. They'll only spend about 40% of their time on the ground, which is very unlike the grey squirrel, who spends about 70% of their time on the ground. So this is another reason it might be more likely you'll see a grey squirrel than a red squirrel. So red squirrels are granivore herbivores, so this means they primarily eat seeds from plants and trees. During late winter and early spring, they will rely on food that they've stashed over autumn months. One study actually found that they stash around 10,000 items of food per year, which is obviously huge, and we're not actually sure if they remember where they put them or if they rely on chance, so they kind of sniff them out and hope they find one. There's some variations between years, so food can be very food availability can vary quite a lot. Some years will be mast years for tree species. For example, last year you might have noticed there was a lot of acorns and they were quite big. I think it's quite safe to say that was a mast year for acorns. So yeah, it does vary how much food is available year on year. When you're walking in the woods, it's quite common to see piles of stripped cones from on tree stumps. Squirrels like to perch up quite high when they're eating to look out for predators or any signs of danger. So if you do see squirrel feeding signs, it's a good indicator that they're around. On this slide on the left, you can see some pine cones that have been stripped by a squirrel. They'll actually rip the spines off the pine cone, while a smaller rodent, such as a mouse, would nibble them away so it leave a smoother edge. That's a good way to tell if there was a squirrel or not. Likewise with nuts, squirrels will crack the nut open, while mouse would gnaw and eat whole, so that's a good way to know which kind of feeding signs you're looking at. When grey squirrels are around, red squirrels generally prefer conifer woodland. This is because grey squirrels live at very high densities, they struggle to be supported by conifer woodland. There's not quite enough food for them, but red squirrels are able to be supported quite easily by conifer woodland. So when grey squirrels are out competing for food, they kind of naturally move into conifer woodland. So some of their favourite foods include Douglas fir, cypress spruce, larch and Scots pine, although they are perfectly adapted to living broadleaf, such as oak as well. So I'll say when greys are present, they tend to move into the conifer. So I mentioned squirrel nests before. These are otherwise called drays, and they're made of sticks and moss and kind of soft things they can find. They spend a lot of time in these, especially in winter. In the summer, they might create more like ledges because it's a bit hotter and they don't want to overheat. They won't always use the same tray. They actually share them, but they won't use them at the same time. If a female squirrel has young in a tray and she detects danger, she will move her young to a different one to make sure that they're safe. So this is something else you might see if you're out during the breeding season. However, unfortunately, red squirrel numbers are in decline. These maps are produced by the Red Squirrel Survival Trust and the Mammal Society. There are a few other organisations also involved. And the first map is based on 1945 data. You can see that much of the UK is still red squirrels only. Grey squirrels have been introduced to the south and they've kind of got a bit of a foothold down there, but they've not really had a huge usually detrimental impact yet. And then year 2000 is the next map. As you can see, greys have become really well established. They are very well suited to our broadleaf woodland, arguably more so than red squirrels, so they've moved up the country and displaced them. The third map's from 2010 and the last one is more recent, from 2020. You can see there's kind of a last stronghold up in Northern England where we are, so yeah, it's very important we do what we can to protect them. Why are they in decline? So there's several reasons. Predation can have an impact. Human influence is a huge one. And then from the grey squirrel, infection and disease and competition for food are two main reasons as well. So I'll speak a little bit more about all of these. So small mammals such as pine marten, wildcats, stoned, will-prey squirrel nestlings. Also raptors, including buzzards and goshawks. However, they did co-evolve alongside these species, so they shouldn't have a hugely detrimental impact to red squirrel populations. It's not unless the population is already damaged from other issues such as human influence or the grey squirrel that it then might be a problem. In more urban areas, cats and dogs may get a red squirrel, but this is quite unlikely, as long as they like to spend a lot of their time high up in the trees. Human influence is a huge issue, so we think about 6,000 years ago, 75% of the UK was covered with woodland, and today only about 12% of this remains, and it's also very fragmented. And the big problem with woodland being fragmented is that it makes it difficult for red squirrel populations to kind of move between woodland and therefore breed successfully or find a sustainable source of food in some instances. Very fast country roads can also be a problem. We quite often get reports from people saying red squirrels have been knocked down, and we'll send out road signs to try and get drivers kind of aware that red squirrels are around, but yeah, they can be an issue as well. But the biggest problem is competition and infection from the American grey squirrel. So grey squirrels were first introduced to England from North America in 1876 as an ornamental species for private collectors. And these introductions continued until 1930, when the damage caused by grey squirrels became recognised, and it was then made illegal to release spawn into the wild. So grey squirrels have rapidly spread and colonised much of the UK to the detriment of our native red squirrels. So greys are roughly about double the size of red squirrels, and they can tolerate living in much denser populations. So you'll get about 15 grey squirrels per hectare in comparison to only about 1.5 red squirrel per hectare. So there really is quite a lot in comparison. And the problem with them living at these really high densities is it gives them the ability to easily outcompete red squirrels for food. As I mentioned briefly before, red squirrels also like broadleaf woodland, but it's the grey's favourite habitat. Greys are actually able to eat unripened seeds when they contain something called tannins. Reds can't, so they'll eat all the seeds off the tree before the red squirrels have a chance to have any, and then by the time they're ripened, they're all gone. So this is a big reason why red squirrels will move to conifer woodland as well. So grey squirrels also carry the deadly squirrelpox virus. This doesn't affect them, they're asymptomatic, they're carriers, but if they do pass it over to a red squirrel, it is then deadly, and they usually die within 2 weeks. It's not a very nice virus. Some people compare it to myxomatosis in rabbits. I didn't actually include the images of squirrelpox because they are quite graphic, but it's definitely incentive in itself to do what we can. So yeah, they're kind of the two main ways that greys negatively impact red squirrel populations. They've also been known to cause issues in the forestry industry. When trees are young, they'll strip bark from them when they're living at these very high densities. And this then kills the trees and it has cost the forestry industry millions of pounds down south. They've also been known to eat quite a lot of small bird eggs, which can then damage small bird populations as well. And the big issue there is that there's so many of them in one place, they kind of run out of other food sources and resort to bark stripping or eating eggs as well. So when you're out, you might wonder if you've seen a red or a grey squirrel. Red squirrels can actually look very grey, and likewise greys can look very red. When a red squirrel grows its winter coat, it often goes a bit darker in colour as well. So there's a few key characteristics you can look out for. The first one being ear tufts. Red squirrels are the only species in this country that will have ear tufts, so that's a really good indicator. They sometimes molt them during the summer, so they don't necessarily always have them, but if you see a squirrel with ear tufts, it's a red. Grey squirrels, on the other hand, they have almost like a white halo around the outside of their tail, so their tail's kind of like two-tone in colour. Red squirrels' tails will generally all be one colour. And of course, grey squirrels are quite a bit bigger and bulkier too. Here's just some examples. So the one on the left, you might think, that looks very red. Surely it's a red squirrel. You can tell simply by the white specks in its tail that it's a grey. And also it has the little mousy ears, there's no tufts. On the right here, that's another variant of the grey squirrel, which was also introduced to the UK from America in around 1912. There's an estimated 25,000 of these in this country now, and they're also invasive, like the grey squirrel. So I'll pass you over to Natasha now for a little bit about the Red Squirrel Recovery Network.
So now we've seen the need for red squirrel conservation, we can explain a little bit about what our next wave of work will be about. So the Red Squirrel Recovery Network is a new project funded by the National Abbie Heritage Fund across multiple partners on a landscape scale, all working together to support red squirrel conservation and creating a legacy for red squirrel recovery. So the main aim of the project is that by 2030 we aim to be even more resilient because there's just more people involved across all different levels, whether that's through volunteer efforts, advocating for red squirrel recovery, or through donating. We want to engage with more people, recruit more volunteers into red squirrel conservation, the movement wide, and then increase staff support to local squirrel groups, which is where we come in, and leave a lasting legacy of the project. So we're not doing this all on our own. The Red Squirrel Recovery Network is building on efforts of the last 20 years, so a lot of work's done on the ground by lots of fabulous volunteers. Without their work we wouldn't be where we are. But the project itself involves lots of other partners. So we are Northern Wildlife Trust, we are lead partner. But there's 6 different conservation organisations involved, which are Cumbria Wildlife Trust, Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside Wildlife Trust. Northsley Safari, Galloway and Southern Ayrshire, UNESCO Biosphère and Bright Green Nature, so they're the main partners. But we're then also working alongside leading squirrel, red squirrel conservation agencies like UK Squirrel Guard and Animal and Plant Health Agency, dealing with lots of different bits that we're all kind of feeding into, as well as volunteer groups on the ground. So this is the project area, so all those red boundaries are boundary areas of where our project partners are working. So the top 2 there are Southern Scotland, and then North England, sorry, on the right, and then Cumbria on the left, and then we've got a little pocket down in Lancashire, where it is. So all of the inner red boundaries are strongholds of red squirrels in England, and then they're called parks in Scotland, so they're priority areas for red squirrel conservation. So within those boundary areas we've got pockets where we know there's red strongholds and our focus areas are on those areas. So me as engagement officer, my focus will be in Bedlington, Blythe and Cramlington, just because it's urban and I get to go out and speak to lots of other people about red squirrel engagement. But there's similar patches of focus within all of the partners areas. So a bit of background then, so Northern Wildlife Trust has been doing working with red squirrel recovery conservation projects for a long time. We are the lead partner on RSRN, but I don't know if anyone's heard of the Red Squirrel Northern England, I hope you have. They've been doing lots of fabulous work for 12 years now. They employ full-time rangers. They have been raising awareness and engaging with landowners over that time, and supporting volunteer groups on the ground. This is a map of rangers' work for RSNE for last year, or the last few years. So that's where our rangers are working as part of RSNE, but that just builds into a much larger picture of what's happening on the ground. Just to make them aware that there's lots of things already going on. And this project is purely just building on that work and trying to have a bit more of coordination and sharing success stories and things like that. So this is, on the left is red squirrel sightings across, in the last 5 years, across the partnership, and then the right is greys. So while the red picture looks pretty good on the left, we know that's a lot of it overlaps with grey maps, so unfortunately there isn't many spaces necessarily where we've got reds on their own. So a lot of these areas do overlap. So they help then inform where we're going to put our focused conservation efforts on the ground and protect the red squirrel population. So this is the bigger map, so that the map 2 slides back feeds into this. So this is work from ranger efforts from Northern Red Squirrels, all the community groups and volunteers and other organisations across Northern England. This is the picture that RSNE have been building up for the last few years, last 12 years or so. But you notice that Scotland's not on that map yet. So there's a need to join up the data with RSRN, and then working with 47 existing volunteer groups as part of Northern Red Squirrels, it enables us to be able to focus that effort and build on what's already happened. So why this project and why now? So these are all the drivers for change that were identified as part of the initial project evaluation of why we needed this huge partnership project. So new control methods are on the horizon, but we need to make sure that we're ready. So as part of the project, we're developing or working with volunteers to develop the mechanism to be able to deliver that to grey squirrels. So that's one of the changes. We need to be ready when it's ready for us, and be able to work on that so that it does work. So grey squirrel numbers are increasing, so is density. So we know that. So that's our biggest driver for change, trying to protect our red populations. Volunteer groups have fed back. We did a lot of initial feedback sessions with volunteers, and their greatest challenges were things like recruiting volunteers, things like awareness raising, so that's where staff like myself and Abbie come in across all the partnership. There's in quite a lot of the partners, there's one of me and one of Abbie in each partner, being able to raise awareness and work with volunteer groups and landowners and things like that, so that's where hopefully our expertise comes in. And yeah, so we're going to be working with those volunteer groups on the ground to be able to do that. And there's just a general lack of awareness and support, so again, if younger people have never seen a red squirrel, how can they care about it? And so hopefully that's where the increased awareness and going to schools and things and doing lots of activities helps us. And we needed a landscape scale approach, so everybody's doing lots of fabulous things, and if we can join up better and share success stories and things like that, be able to create case studies about what's working well and what we can improve on and what we can go in and help with, is really beneficial. So project outcomes, so on a real kind of surface level, we're trying to increase and diversify the number of active volunteers, whether that be through awareness raising like ourselves, or through being on the ground. I'm quite happy to be sat in a supermarket telling people about red squirrels and the need for conservation and for them to help. And then ensuring the volunteers have the skills that they need, so increasing opportunities for upskilling, and then being able to access the new methods of squirrel management. And then speaking to landowners, quite a lot of what Abbie's been doing previously is speaking to landowners and creating those links between volunteer groups that are already working in that area, and then being able to communicate much more efficiently. And then just improved data collection. As a whole, there's lots of people collecting lots of data, so being able to feed that back into a map, to be able to create maps like that really does help, being able to see where our efforts need to be given next. So increasing awareness. So the slides were called Don't Be Shy, so that's the campaign across all partners. So if you see that online, please do engage with us. So Don't Be Shy is the theme of the whole campaign, and we're really looking to have a designated comms officer based at Lancashire who will coordinate a lot of that effort across all partners. So yeah, that's it. But there was a real need identified for much more awareness and just help volunteer groups do really well doing things on the ground and getting their boots on the ground. And the more that we can talk to people and highlight that effort, the better. So as part of the project, we've also got external partners, the University of York, UK School of Garden, North Safari, working on developing lots of secondary school resources. So that will be applicable to the Scottish Highers and our GCSE and A-levels. So there'll be like toolkits for and CPD to be able to teach teachers how to then go and make our red squirrel conservation part of the curriculum, and that's beneficial to young people, but also makes sense linked to what they're supposed to be learning, and that will be developed as part of the project as well. And then,
so another aim of ours is to continue the spring monitoring programme. So this actually began in 2012 and has been run by Squirrel Northern England since, the project Natasha just mentioned. But this is now moved to RSRN, and the idea is to expand it as much as we can, and also into South Scotland, where our new partner is as well. So the spring survey is typically completed between March and May, so it's a 3-month monitoring period. And rather than looking at like how many squirrels are in a woodland, it looks at whether greys or reds are present or absent, and then measures like changes in distribution and occupancy over time. So it really helps us know what the current situation is, and also if the work we're doing is paying off. And then, if we need to concentrate a bit more on an area, if it might be looking like the greys are incurring, we can easily inform based on the results. So yeah, we aim to do around 250 to 300 surveys a year. And there's 3 different methods: of the trail camera method, the visual transect method, and the observed feeder method. The majority of surveys are trail camera, and this is when you attach a trail camera to a tree, feeder to one opposite. We'll then leave it for 2 weeks, come back and move it to a second location within the same woodland for a further 2 weeks, and then come and collect the equipment and analyse the results. So yeah, we're trying to move more towards camera so that the results are all kind of comparable and it's a bit more robust. On the left there, that's just an overview of last year's results. Red squirrels were found in 42.2% of sites. This was a decrease of around 10% compared to the year before, which was quite a huge drop, and so we don't usually see that. However, it is worth noting that a lot of the surveys we usually undertake weren't completed last year. We're hoping now that the red squirrel recovery network's underway, we're going to have a lot more time and kind of resources to increase the survey again. Grey squirrels were found in 65% of sites, which was also a decrease of about 4% comparatively to 2024. So yeah, we'll see what this year's results bring. Hopefully we do see an increase in red squirrel occupancy. Last year, 237 tetrads were surveyed. We do each survey within a 2x2 kilometre area, otherwise called a tetrad, and 106 people were involved. Most of these people are volunteers from the community volunteer groups that Tash mentioned, so it's really thanks to them that we're able to do this. And then yeah, since 2012 we've undertaken 3,482 surveys. On the right here, that's just an example of one of the trail camera surveys. As well as the camera, we'll also put some sticky hair pads under the lid of the feeder, so that when the squirrel goes to get food, they'll leave a sample of hair behind. So if for any reason the camera fails or the images are unclear, we can then analyse the hair that was on the sticky pads. It's best to do it with a microscope, but you can sometimes tell just based on the colour. If the hair's kind of two-tone, it's a grey squirrel. If it's all one colour, it's more likely a red squirrel. Pass it back to Natasha.
So as part of the project, I'll go through a few more of the things that the project will, some of the outcomes of the project. So the volunteer groups, as part of Northern Red Squirrels, will be eligible to apply, register for up to £1,000 per year per group. So across the 5 years of the project, that's a decent little pot of fund for equipment, for things like the cameras and the equipment that they need to monitor on the ground. But also could be fun things like squirrel suit, and also for engagement, like having a table at events and things like what you've seen outside. Not all squirrel groups will have that already, just because of depends on how big they are. A lot of them do, but some of them don't. So that's up for grabs. And then community grants. So the first year is not quite open, but please do pass on the message to lots of people in the community, because it's open to all community groups across all of the partners. And there'll be £50,000 awarded per year for the 5 years of the project, from small micro grants under £500 to larger ones over £500 with slightly different prerequisites. And then that's for supporting experiences and awareness and engagement and things like that. So whether you get one of us along in a squirrel suit, or bake things like cookies, a lot of it will be you can, like the scout groups and things like that, to make monitoring boxes to then donate to local squirrel groups that can put them up and use them for monitoring. So there's lots of different options for being able to use that money for lots of different community groups. And then they'll be supported by myself and Abbie in Northumberland, and then other project officers in various other partners.
So yeah, Tash did mention briefly the grey squirrel contraceptive before. A big aim of RSRN is to work with volunteer groups and figure out exactly how it's going to be deployed when it's ready. Obviously it's going to be a huge task. We need to know where, how much, how often. So this is one of the aims, and currently the contraceptive has had a breakthrough recently. I believe it was tested successfully in rats. So the next stage is to test it on grey squirrels, and then see, after that, can we get the drug verified and then rolled out.
And just a quick summary of the benefits of the project then. So we're working on national and local comms from all different partners. There'll be £1,000 per group per year for equipment, for supporting local volunteer groups. There'll be the community grants. So yeah, quite a big chunk of money, 250,000 will be going to different community groups across the partnership. Project staff will be working with groups to increase the support and funding, so that's where we come in. More landowners will be undertaking grey squirrel control, so that's working with groups and with us to do that. More people will be involved in the spring survey, whether that be in gardens or whether it be all the squirrel groups feeding back to us. And we'll be collecting and managing records, so for the first time we've got a designated data officer for that, because it used to be Abbie doing that alongside everything else for our SNE, so now we're really lucky that we've got that staff time to be able to do that. And then we'll be increasing training and guidance on monitoring and things like that, and then sharing knowledge and experience with the wider network, so all the partners will be meeting together regularly to talk about what's going well, what's not, and how we can improve on the groundwork. And then there's new partners involved that weren't necessarily involved in red squirrel conservation previously, but are now working for that for the long term. So hopefully leaving a legacy for continuation of work that's been built on for the past 20 years or so. What can you guys do to help? So there's lots of ways you can help with red squirrel conservation. So please do report all of your sightings, both reds and greys. The picture on the ground for both species really does help. And you can do that via the RSNE website. You can encourage reds to use a garden feeder. If you've got reds already, that's fantastic. We don't necessarily feed in gardens if you've got both, just because of tox and things like that. But there's definitely opportunities where you've got reds, so please do speak to us or your local school group. Lots of support for volunteers with community groups, and you can find your local one at Northern Red Squirrels. There's a lovely map where it shows all the boundary areas, because a lot of them, for example, Cramlington that we're working with, they cover lots more area than just Cramlington. They're into Blind and things like that as well, so it might be that there's a larger area and you fit into one particular group. And then you can survey or monitor for squirrels. You can come and help your local volunteer group do that, and you can also support our work in terms of Friends of the Red Squirrel will directly match fund what our forthcoming